Hello my friends and welcome back. Okay, so I have another review for you guys today. This is the Turkish Killich by a company named Swordby. Now, this is actually the second time I have filmed this review because the first time I went through an entire review and I lost all of the footage due to some technical difficulties and some data storage issues, and yeah, I was not very happy about it. I had spent a lot of time on doing the review and then I lost it all. So this is actually my second attempt at doing the review portion of this video. So here we go. All right, so this is the Killich by Swordby. Now, this is attempting to replicate a sword that would have been found throughout the Middle East during the time of swords. It also made its way through down to Indo-Persia, into India and stuff like that. And this blade design has been known to influence other swords over in India, like the talwar. There are some talwars that have this flared portion here. So seeing some influence from the killich. Now, I saw this sword on Swordby for $250 US. I think it's 249, shipped to your house. So that's actually pretty good. These are handmade in Turkey in Yadigan. And that's actually pretty cool because Yadigan is known as a historical place for making swords. There's actually a sword type called the Yadigan, which is actually pretty cool. So let's talk about the design of this sword, or the killich, I should say, and what it would have been used for and how it would have been used. And then we'll go ahead and talk about this specific example. So the killich is a lot like the shamshir. It has this really large curved blade, but different than the shamshir, the blade is a lot wider and it has this flared portion here that gets a lot wider for extra mass and power in the cut. And as you guys can see, this is definitely a cutting sword. You can, in fact, thrust with it if you want to. It is pointy enough, and it does have a, it does have a point. So if you wanted to thrust, you can. However, this sword is optimized for cutting. Now, the grip is very stereotypical of sort of a Islamic or Middle Eastern shamshir style grip. Very common to the Turkish killich. And yeah, this is what they were going after at Swordby. Now, this sword costs $250 US. So that's actually pretty good. That puts it within the budget range of functional replica swords. Now, how the sword was actually used historically, I am not an expert on Middle Eastern swordsmanship. I'm actually not an expert on any type of swordsmanship. I'm just an enthusiast and a dedicated collector. However, from what I understand about this type of sword is that, like I said, it is made for cutting. And a lot of times in Middle Eastern swordsmanship, also in Indo-Persian swordsmanship, they use this thing called the drawing cut, where you basically use a lot of your shoulder, you keep your wrist locked, and you draw your blade across the target. And you can definitely see that this sword would benefit from that type of swordsmanship. Now, I'm very used to saber style. When it comes to using a one-handed curved sword, I'm used to saber systems where when you cut, you actually lunge forward, break the wrist forward, and do these large sweeping cuts. Now, you can actually do that with this sword and it works just fine. However, I think it is intended to be used more often with drawing cuts. So yeah, that's actually pretty much all I know about the swordsmanship of this particular sword. So without further ado, let's get into the different aspects of this particular model right here, and then we can go look at some test cutting footage, and I can tell you whether or not I think this sword is worth your money. So let's start off by looking at the sword's hilt. So it has a wooden grip and a full tang construction, which you can see here, which is actually really cool in terms for durability. Full tang is always really nice. Now, I don't know historically if these swords were in fact full tang construction. I don't think I've seen one that's like that. Usually it's like a hidden tang, or just basically like a regular tang that runs into the grip. So this is cool that Swordby decided to use a full tang construction for added strength. Now, it looks as though it's 2 panels of really nice walnut. Which I really do like, by the way, guys. This walnut wood and the pattern that is in here is absolutely, the wood grain pattern is absolutely beautiful. Now, it looks as though, I'm not sure if these are actually peened on here. It does look like these 2 scales were actually peened here with these 3 peens, which, is actually historical. I've seen original examples that have that type of that type of method for fastening the scales or the wood to the tang. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Now, in terms of how this grip functions as a grip, there's basically 3 ways that I found that you can grip this sword. Now, you can dig your pinky down here into this crevice, this nice crevice right here, and hold the sword there all the way down here, which really accentuates the tip heaviness of this sword. Or you can grip sort of center mass right here, which is more standard. And then the third way that I think is very nice to grip this sword is 1 finger over the quillion. Now, I'm not sure if they actually use this style of grip historically in Middle Eastern swordsmanship. However, I found that this is probably the most comfortable grip for this sword. Although not all 3 of those grip styles are actually fairly comfortable with this grip. You can see that it's rather rectangular in shape, which is good and bad. However, rectangle shape allows you to index the blade very easily. However, with curved swords, indexing is usually not that much of an issue. So I actually would have preferred if this grip were a little bit more rounded and tapered, like some of the historical examples that I've seen, which get really thin in this area and then get a little bit wider in this area here. However, the grip is actually pretty comfortable, and there's really no issues in terms of using it and its functionality. It works just fine. Moving on to the crossguard, this is where I have some issues with this sword. All right, so as you can see, it's colored in this brass shiny color. I did find out that this is actually not real brass, sorry. It's plated alloy. They were able to color it, or I'm not sure if this is a brass plating or what kind of plating it is, but it's a yellow plating on alloy, and you can see that here where I actually sanded the sword down a little bit, and you can actually see that it is like a silver color underneath. So it's not real brass. It's some type of alloy colored and plated shiny yellow to look like brass. Now, I actually don't like that. That gives it more of a cheap look. So I'll talk about that a little bit more when I give my final thoughts. And the other thing is that it's not one solid casting. It is, in fact, actually a 2-piece construction. And you can see a seam right here. So it's basically 2 castings that they were able to put together to form this guard. Once again, that's not something that I'm a really big fan of. I would have much more appreciated a solid casting. For aesthetics and as well as functionality, I believe a solid piece would be more durable. However, I do understand that they may have chose this option of construction for cost-saving measures. However, there are swords in this price range. In particular, I'm not going to name other brands, but I know that there's one other Shamshir on the market that does, in fact, have a solid crossguard, just like this particular shape here, and it falls within this particular price range. So it can be done for this money, just to throw that out there. Now, in terms of the guard shape, I really, really like it. It's very aesthetically pleasing. It's very classical. It looks really, really nice in terms of shape. Now, let's move on to the next portion of the sword, which is in fact the business end of the sword, the blade. Now, the blade is actually quite interesting on this sword. Now, we're going to talk about it right now. So, first of all, let's start with the material that it is made out of. This is not a high carbon steel. This is, in fact, 4034 stainless steel. That's the choice that the guys at Sword By decided to use for this particular sword, and I think all of their swords. Now, as you guys know, and I can hear some groaning out there right now, that usually stainless steel is not used for functional replica in production swords, because it is considered to be too brittle and not durable enough for things that you would do with a sword. Slash, cut, and hit objects. Usually stainless steel is just not good enough in terms of durability for those kinds of activities. So it's interesting that they decided to use this particular steel for their functional sword. Now, we'll talk about its durability later on and when you see the test cutting footage, because I do a little bit of an abusive test on this blade. So it has a mirror polish, which has actually done pretty nicely. And as you can see, it has this large grind, hollow grind, right behind the edge. Now that actually assists in cutting very, very well. And once again, you'll see that in the footage. And the sword came extremely sharp, which is very much appreciated. Too many swords, it doesn't matter from low end to high end, too many swords come, functional swords come not sharp enough. And this one here did not have that problem. I did nothing to this edge whatsoever, and it came super razor sharp. So I just want to let you guys know, good job, Sword By, for actually selling a sharp sword. The false edge has been ground with a hollow grind also. However, it hasn't been sharpened, but you could easily sharpen this false edge, which I probably will end up doing. On the blade, they did some laser engraving, and I believe this is Arabic inscription from the Quran. I'm not sure 100%, but I believe it is. I don't know exactly what it says, but they also did a laser engraving of a really cool design right here. Now, I'm not really into engraving and laser engraving on my swords. However, they actually did a really nice job, and this option they offer essentially for free. It's part of the price of the sword. So you can get other characters laser engraved on here. You can get your name. You can get all types of other words if you want, and I think maybe some designs. You just have to send them some pictures, and they will actually do that for you, included in the price. So that's actually pretty nice if you're into that sort of thing. Now, the other thing about the blade, and this is a major thing, is that the blade does not have distal taper. Now, it is tempered quite substantially, and as you can see, it does have flex, but it's not flexing up here. It's actually flexing right in the middle, which is, in fact, because the sword lacks distal taper. It's essentially one thickness from the base of the blade all the way up to the tip. It does actually get a little bit thinner towards the tip because of the grinding, but it's not real distal taper. Now, that's a little bit of a problem for a sword that has all this mass up here, because it definitely feels tip heavy. Now, that being said, in terms of handling in this blade, even though it lacks distal taper, and not all swords historically had distal taper, even though it lacks distal taper, it's actually pretty maneuverable once you learn to use it and understand where the weight is situated. And one of the things I noticed about doing that grip over the Kilij like this is that that brings a lot of the center of balance back towards the guard, brings the center of balance back towards the hand. And that actually makes the sword quite maneuverable. And when you grip it like this, it actually feels pretty good to swing around, guys. Now, I think it would be 100 times better if it actually had real distal taper. And that's something that the guys at Sword By should consider, doing the research and time to get that right. Because I do think originals had it. And even if they mostly didn't have it or whatnot, this sword would benefit highly from it because of the extra mass up here. Basically, just taking some mass from up here and bringing it down here and having it taper all the way up so that this portion is thinner than this portion down here and that this portion is thicker. I'm sure you guys are familiar with distal taper. So the sword lacks it, but overall, the sword handles okay. You can definitely tell that it's a weighty, tip-heavy sword, but it wants to cut and it moves pretty decently. So yeah, now that I've talked about some of the features of the sword, let's take a look at the test cutting footage because I had a lot of fun using it, and then I'll give you guys my final opinion on whether or not I think this sword is worth your money. Okay guys, now that you've seen the test cutting footage and the short abusive test that I did, I can give you my final opinion on this particular sword. So, I had a lot of fun cutting with it. I'm not gonna lie, it is an excellent cutter. It went right through water bottles of both thicknesses, you know, the thinner ones and the thicker ones, very, very easily. Like I said, I did not touch up this edge. This edge is the factory edge and I didn't have to do anything to it. It cut tatami, no problem, and water bottles, no problem. And as you can see from the abusive test that I did, that piece of wood was very thick. And swords are not axes, and they're not meant to be. So I chopped the heck out of that thing, and this blade took no damage, and it is still incredibly sharp, and it did not take a set. So yeah, I mean, that speaks for itself, I would say, in terms of whether or not I think that this steel is durable enough. Some of you guys may have your doubts out there, and you know what? I still even have my doubts. It's just built into me. I don't know. High carbon steel is usually the way you go. However, from what I use my swords for and that particular test that I did, this steel seemed to hold up pretty well. So my example had no problems with durability. And it is an excellent cutter. I do have to say, guys, it was very, very fun to use as a cutting sword and to learn what it's like to hold and use a large curved saber style blade. In this case, it's not a saber, it's a killich. So it cut well. In terms of handling, it takes a little bit of getting used to, and I already talked about the fact that it does not have the distal taper. If it did, it would handle a lot better. But I actually had no problem moving it around and stopping it. So starting and stopping this sword were actually pretty easy. You can definitely feel, though, the tip heaviness of the sword, and this is not a light sword just in general. I didn't have a chance to throw it on the scale. I'm sorry, but yeah, it's a weighty sword, but for its weight and the fact that it does not have distal taper, it actually moves pretty decently. So do I think it's worth it? Well, I mean, what are the cons? Well, first of all, the crossguard. The crossguard is a really big letdown for me. I don't like it aesthetically because of the two-piece construction, and I don't like this this finish. So this is something that I think is a con, and of course the distal taper. You know, the stainless steel. It's up to you guys whether or not you think you know, you would buy a sword that has stainless steel. Like I said, this one had no problem in terms of cutting, and it performed very, very well. But the lack of distal taper and the crossguard issue, and just the general sort of lack of refinement on this blade and this sword are definitely negatives. The pluses, you know, or the pros, it's 250 bucks, and it's a Turkish killich from Turkey, handmade. And it performs extremely well, and you can have a lot of fun in your backyard cutting with this thing, and it is very aesthetically pleasing. And it was $250, shipped very, very quickly, free shipping to your house. So if you are into Middle Eastern swordsmanship or Turkish swords in general, or, you know, Middle Eastern style swords, this is, and you're not a super dedicated discerning collector, you know, this is definitely worth taking a look at. I mean, it's functional. It's a sword. it's a Turkish killich, and it's functional. And there's not a lot of these on the market, guys. And I feel like that's also a very a big pro, is that, you know, your options are limited for a Turkish killich, a functional one, if you want one to use and cut with and learn to appreciate this style of swordsmanship that goes with this. But on the other hand, if you are in fact a dedicated and discerning collector, this sword I don't think is going to be for you, because of the lack of refinement, the lack of distal taper, and, you know, the cheap parts. The cheap parts of the sword. However, once again, if you are a dedicated collector, you're willing to spend more than $250 to make sure that those things are right and acceptable for you. So, do I think it's worth it? It really all depends on what kind of collector you are. There's a lot of things to appreciate about this sword, and there's a lot of things that I think can get better. So if Swordby wants to, they could use this for a blueprint for a much higher quality sword that addresses all those features, and they could even charge more money for it, and I think people would pay for it. I know I certainly would. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this review. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. Leave a like or subscribe, or both, or leave some comments down below if you want to talk about this more. Thank you very much, guys. Have a really good day, and stay tuned for the next review, because the next one is going to be awesome. I'm very excited about it. I think I might say that at the end of every video, but thank you so much for coming by and watching my video, and stay safe.